When I was young, I was lucky to have a martial art instructor who taught me how to meditate. And I've used that over the course of my life to help me with many things, from state exams to going for gradings in karate, or even just when things got a little bit heavy in life. It's been an invaluable tool. It helps to create a stillness. Now, it's with that in mind that I want to talk to you about something that I've recorded some years ago. When practicing Amatsu, I was acutely aware as to the benefits of Amatsu and what it was doing for the people who was coming to my practice. And of course, these were people typically who were injured. Nowadays, we also have a performance clinic, but back then, the people who came had a problem, an ailment of some description that they wanted help with. But I knew there was something more. I knew I had to do something to help people that wanted to live a little bit better, but I didn't know how to do it. I had all these movements through my martial arts and my gymnastics and through the things that I'd done over my life. I had all this knowledge to do with the Amatsu therapy that I'd done and all the other therapies that I had done prior to and around it. But I still didn't have something that stitched it together. So I started meditating on it. And between 2013 and about 2016, I did various meditations and came out the other side of the meditations and journaled what it was that I had as an insight from that particular meditative journey. Now, what we're going to share here is something from 2013, and it's about 45 minutes long. It was recorded before we had any of those fancy mics, so it's scratchy and echoey, and there's even noise in the background. We've put a video on it and a little bit of music in the background to make it a little bit more tolerable because the audio is really poor, but the message is good. And what the message ultimately is the exploration that I went on pertaining to consciousness. And I'll leave the rest of that explanation in the video for you if you choose to watch it and listen to it. But ultimately what it was the underpinning of what became the Biota method. It was the conversations that I was having that ultimately allowed me to create the syllabus and the construct on what it was that the Biota method needed to be for me to share it well. I hope you enjoy it. It lives on the Biota method YouTube channel. And if you are watching this on YouTube, enjoy. If you're watching this on one of the social media platforms, you need to go over there. All right, all the best. Bye-bye. Your life was not written in some fixed and final way before you were born. And yet something of you was already in motion. Not as faith, not as a prison, not as a script from which there is no escape, but as a continuity, as a pattern, as intelligence, as a living field of being that precedes the narrow story of your own current name, your current history, your current circumstances. There is something moving through your life that is deeper than personality, deeper than biography, deeper than the roles the world has handed you and asked you to perform. Across traditions and cultures and ages, human beings have tried to describe this. They have reached for symbols, stories, metaphors, and sacred language to point towards something they could feel but could never really contain in words. Some call it the acacia, the subtle essence, the ether, the unseen, the medium through which all things arise. Others came to speak of the Akashic records, a phrase meant to point towards a field in which the memory of every soul, every action, every thought, every movement, in fact, is becoming and is somehow held. But for me, long before I ever heard that phrase, there was another way this revealed itself to me. I call it the is, and I still do, because the is the sound I hear when I'm graced with sufficient awareness, alignment, and empathy to glimpse and engage with this intelligence, this perpetual becoming that I affectionately call the is. Because what I'm pointing towards is not just a record, not just a spiritual archive, not even a celestial filing system preserving the past. The is living, omnipresent field of intelligence and life force itself. It's not merely what has been, it is through which all things are, the one, the all, the us of everything all together at all times, but exclusively now. It's not somewhere else, it's not later, it's not trapped behind you in time, it is here, now alive. And if you really listen, and you know this already, you will have felt moments in your life that did not belong to ordinary thought. A strange stillness in meditation where something clearer than your mind seemed to speak. A dream that felt less like fantasy and more like contact. A moment of déjà vu that struck not as novelty, but as recognition. An encounter with a person, a place, a path that felt uncannily familiar. As though something in you had arrived there long before your body did. These moments are easy to dismiss if you live only from the surface. But if you have lived long enough and listened deeply enough, you begin to realize they are not random. And when I say living long enough, I don't talk about how long you've been alive. I mean, how long have you been living? But these things, as I said, are not random. They are openings. They are cracks in the ordinary frame. Small revelations that the self you have been taught to identify with is not the whole of you. Most people are trained to think of themselves as beginning at birth, a gathering of experiences for so many decades, then disappearing again into silence. Identity becomes a social arrangement, a legal arrangement, a psychological arrangement. You are given a name, a nationality, a religion perhaps, a gendered story, a family story, a cultured script, a history of success and failure, and slowly, without anyone needing to say it too bluntly, you are taught to assume that this is all you are. But something in us resists that reduction. Something in us knows that the self is not exhausted by our biography. Something in us knows we are older than our resume, older than our trauma, older than our preferences, older even than the story we keep telling ourselves about who we are. The deeper knowing has always been with humanity. The Vedic seers of India spoke of the Akasha not as a poetic decoration, but as subtle reality itself. Mystic strands of Judaism spoke of the Book of Life. Islamic traditions have the image of the preserved tablet. Ancient Egyptian, Gnostic, Druidic, and many indigenous ways of knowing all carried some recognition that reality is not empty, not mute, not disconnected, but ordered by a subtler intelligence that remembers. Not remembers merely in the human sense, but remembers in the sense that nothing real is ever truly outside the field of being. This is where the word records can help, but also mislead. It helps because it gestures towards continuity. It misleads because it can take the whole thing and make it sound static. Like a storage unit for the past, a heavenly library, a place where scrolls and histories are filed away somewhere behind the curtain of the visible. But the is more alive than that. The is not a dead archive, it's the living continuity of intelligence itself. It is the field in which memory, pattern, possibility, relationship, and becoming are entwined together as one. So when I speak of the is, I am not speaking only of what happened before. I'm speaking of the living, timeless intelligence that moves through what has been, what is, and what is to become from a human perspective. But in fact, what has already become in the infinite possibilities and realms that are not bound by our limited voucher of time. There is only now, and the now is. However, you, for now, will likely find it easier to view the self, the I, the me, as a person with a past, present, and future. The field, the now, the is, does not conform to this limitation. This matters because the moment you move from seeing this field as a storehouse of the past to recognizing it as a living field of omnipresent wisdom, your whole relationship to your life changes. You stop treating yourself like an isolated event. You begin to sense yourself as a continuity, not a blank slate, not a random accident, not a disconnected fragment, but a living expression of an intelligence already infinite, in motion and expression. That does not mean your choices do not matter. They matter enormously. It does not even mean that everything is predetermined. It is not. And it does not mean you should become inflated and imagine every preference, every fantasy, every emotional surge to be some kind of cosmetic truth. Discernment still matters. Humility significantly matters. Grounding still matters. But within that humility, another truth becomes possible. You may live your life far more intelligible than you've been taught. The patterns you repeat may not be random. The fears that seem older than your circumstances may not have begun where you think they began. The gifts that you carry may not be new. The people who arrive with strange familiarity may not be strangers in the deepest sense. The work that you're drawing toward may not simply be a career preference, but part of a much longer unfolding. This is why so many spiritual traditions have spoken in terms of karma. And karma has been misunderstood so badly that many people hear the word and think immediately of punishment, reward, cosmic justice, or some grand invisible accountant keeping score. Karma is not punishment. Karma is continuity of movement and balance. It is momentum. It is unresolved pattern seeking expression until it is clearly, enoughly, fully felt and lived consciously, sufficiently so to be transformed and brought back into balance. You understand this already in your body. An old injury does not disappear just because time has passed. It changes how you move. The compensation patterns emerge. Tension settles in one place because something elsewhere was never integrated. The body remembers it in its own way. It carries unfinished stories through posture and restriction and sensitivity and habit and defense. Fascia is the universe within, the cosmic connectivity of the movement, the life, the expression and the potential. The soul is no different. The psyche is no different. The field is no different. What remains unresolved continues to shape your expression. And that shaping can continue across years, relationships, generations, perhaps even across what we consider and call lifetimes. It's the same kind of heartbreak, dressed in different faces. The same betrayal appearing in different contexts. The same fear of visibility, the same fear of truth. The same tendency to shrink, to please, to dominate, to hide, to grasp, to run. Until seen, the pattern lives you. When seen, the pattern can be met. And when truly met, what once felt like faith begins to become material for freedom. This is one of the deepest uses of the Akashic idea, or more truly, of the is. It allows you to ask a better question. Not merely, why is this happening to me? But what pattern is seeking resolution here? What movement is trying to complete itself? What intelligence is trying to emerge through this difficulty? That does not remove pain, that does not bypass the human, it does not romanticize suffering, but it restores meaning to experience. And meaning, rightly held, that changes the quality of your life, segues you from pain, suffering, and held restriction. This describes your returning home, your alignment, your repatriation to all that is. There is another side to this too. In this context, we often hear people speak of soul continuity, but only in terms of wounds and karma and contracts and pain and unfinished business. But wisdom travels as well. Refinement travels as well. Capacities travel too. Some people arrive carrying an inexplicable ease in healing. in music, in teaching, in prayer, in vision, in craft, in leadership, service, and even subtle perception. Yes, some of this is shaped by upbringing and temperament, of course, but not all of it. Sometimes the soul enters already in the midst of a longer apprenticeship. This is why certain abilities can feel ancient, why some forms of knowing arrive before training, why a person can be mysteriously drawn towards a path they have no sensible reason for understanding so intimately. The is does not only carry wounds, it carries mastery, it carries devotion. It carries the slow ripening of consciousness through many forms of experience. And when you begin to sense that, comparison starts to loosen. You stop measuring your unfolding against someone else's timing. You stop asking why your life is not following a more conventional script. You stop assuming that delay means failure. You begin to realize that every being is moving through a different pattern of lessons, gift, residues, openings, and callings. Your path is not meant to look like theirs. Your rhythm is not meant to match theirs. Your becoming is not late, it's exact. This is one of the great reliefs that comes from a person when they begin to feel the is directly. The compulsion to force life into borrowed templates, it begins to soften. And from there, purpose begins to look different too. Purpose is not something you go out and invent as though you were building a brand. It's not an identity badge. It's not a slogan. Purpose is something that comes into view as distortion falls away, as noise lessens, as false allegiance drops, as the deeper movement of your being is allowed to come forward. The modern world trains us to seek purpose as a kind of performance, a role, a title, a profitable expression of self. But from the view of the is, purpose is more like alignment, more like remembering the shape of your own participation in life. Not how do I become important, but what is trying to live through me? That is a very different question, and it cannot be answered merely by thought. It has to be listened for, felt for, lived into. This is why stillness matters so much. Not because stillness is fashionable, not because silence makes us spiritual, but because stillness lowers the noise enough for the deeper truth to become perceptible. The is does not usually shout. It whispers. And often that whisper sounds disturbingly like your own deepest voice. Quieter than thought, older than the stories, more honest than preference, more spacious than fear. You cannot force your way into that. You cannot conquer it with effort. You do not access the is in the way you log into a system. You come into enough presence, sincerity, and coherence that was always there because it becomes apparent. That is why people have glimpsed this field through so many doorways. Meditation, prayer, dreams, silence, breathwork, grief, and the aftermath of heartbreak, illness, nature, but also art. Those moments when ordinary identity breaks just enough for a subtler order to shine through. The doorway varies, but the principle is the same. The noise lowers, the signal clears, the contact becomes possible. And how that contact appears will differ from person to person. Some will describe a symbolic library, a temple, scrolls, light, guides, sacred architecture. Some will experience color, vibration, sound, direct knowing, bodily release, waves of grief, flashes of imagery, or a certainty that bypasses thought entirely. None of these forms should be clung to too literally, because the psyche often dresses the invisible in images that it can recognize. The essence is not the image, the essence is the contact, and the contact has a distinct quality. It does not feel like ordinary mental chatter. It carries a density of truth, a simplicity, a strange authority that does not need to shout. Sometimes it comes as a sentence, sometimes as bodily recognition, sometimes as the sudden reorganization of many years of confusion into one clear seeing. Sometimes as grief that surfaces from nowhere and reveals itself to have been waiting for decades. Sometimes as a release, sometimes as a call, and often, very often, it comes in disguise. In the dream that lingers, in a chance meeting that is not chance, in a piece of music that undoes you, in a line from a book that feels as though it was written from inside of your own chest. And my favourite, in an irrational yet precise knowing that a path is through, even though it makes no strategic sense whatsoever. The modern mind is uncomfortable here because it has been trained to trust only what is measurable, repeatable, and externally sanctioned. There is some value in those things, but they are not the whole of reality. Human beings have overdeveloped analysis and underdeveloped direct perception. We have become wealthy in information and poor in inward contact, awareness and perception, and honesty. So when the deeper field speaks, many dismiss it before they have even learned how to listen responsibly. To speak of the is not to reject science. It is simply to recognize that current models of reality may still be partial. At the edge of physics, the old mechanical world has long been under pressure. Matter is no longer a solid or a self-sufficient common sense state as it was once imagined. Information relating to field and emergence have become increasingly important concepts. Thinkers such as Erwin Laszlo has tried to articulate universal informational field theories that bear striking resemblance to the older spiritual intuitions. Figures like David Bohm or Carl Pilgrim have opened holographic metaphors that suggest reality must be far deeply interconnected than surface perception allows. Do these ideas prove the Akashic records of the is? No. But they do make one thing clear. The old certainty that reality is merely a dead machine and consciousness an accidental byproduct of chemistry is no longer the only serious story available. And human experience itself keeps complicating that reduction because intuition remains, synchronicity remains, near-death experience remain, unlearned aptitudes remain, dreams that arrive with impossible precision remain, children with strange memories remain, the subtle sense of non-local connection remains. And again, humanity matters here because humility matters here. Not gullibility, not grand claims, not naive certainty, but humility. As something greater is going on than the surface model can explain. And if that is so, that brings us to something else then. The human being is not merely a consumer, an employee, a patient, a demographic unit, or a psychological profile. The human being is a participant in a much larger field of intelligence. This has consequences, neither positive or negative, because that depends upon perspective and intent. Because the moment the person begins to feel that field, the is, even faintly, they become less easy to organize, and they start to abandon these shallow identities. Roles start to feel thinner. Borrowed ambitions lose glamour. Success without soul becomes suffocating. Old scripts, they begin to crack. This is why so many people who come into contact with deeper truth, they do it through rupture. A career that looked right suddenly becomes uninhabitable. A relationship collapses, and with it, the identity built around it. A grief tears through the architecture of certainty. The body begins speaking in symptoms that cannot be solved by surface logic alone. The old life starts failing to contain the truth that's trying to emerge. What the world calls crisis is sometimes contact. What looks like breakdown is sometimes the first honest moment in years. The old noise no longer works, and the buried signal becomes audible. At that point, many people ask, how to work with this? How to access it? How do I hear it clearly? And here, simplicity really matters. Start simply, not with theatrics, not with borrowed mysticism, not with a hunger to be special. Sit. Become quiet. Ask a real question. Not, how do I become powerful? Not, what identity can I claim to make my life feel extraordinary? Not, tell some glamorous story about who I was in another age. Ask something honest. What am I repeating? What have I refused to see? What truth have I made too much noise to hear? What in me is unfinished? What in me is trying to emerge? What am I protecting that is no longer worthy of protection? What deeper movement is asking for my participation? Then wait, not in strain, not in performance. Wait the way one listens to distant music, with patience, with receptivity, with respect, with responsibility, with enough softness that something quieter than your ordinary mind has space to arrive. Sometimes the response will come in the moment. Sometimes it will come hours later while you are washing dishes, walking by the water, driving alone, or just after waking. Sometimes it will not come as words at all, but as a bodily shift, a loosening, a sob, a sudden, spacious, or a simple but irreversible knowing. But you will know. Journaling can help. Not polished journaling. Not writing for an audience. Raw writing. Writing until the censor gets tired and something more direct begins to speak. Meditation can help. Breath work can help. Time in nature can help. Prayer can help. Creative work can help. Music, poetry can help. Silence can help. Not because there is one approved method, but because all of these can lower that static. And then, of course, there is the shadow work. Now, this matters deeply because what often blocks contact is not incapacity, it is avoidance. We are afraid of what we might meet if we really listen. The grief we never metabolized, the guilt we never touched honestly, the truth we swallowed to preserve belonging, the rage we disguised as spirituality, the pattern we keep blaming on others because we cannot bear to admit how invested we are in repeating it. The is does not reveal these things to shame you. It reveals them so they can be integrated. This is why, with deeper truth, it can feel emotional. It can feel even cellular. Because tears will arrive, heat will move, the chest will soften, the belly will churn, old memories can sharpen. The body remembers because it has been carrying that story all along, in posture, breath, fascia, reflex, and defense. When deeper truth enters, reorganization follows. This is not a failure, this is intelligence. And that is the process that deepens and creates a profound shift. And then the beginning, the becoming occurs. You stop relating to your life primarily as a problem to solve. You begin relating to it as a field of meaning to inhabit consciously. You become less interested in control and more interested in alignment. Less interested in appearing wise and more interested in becoming honest. Less fascinated by certainty and more available to truth. The question, who am I, begins to transform. It becomes less about identity and more about continuity. Less about image and more about essence. Not what should I call myself, but what has always been trying to live through me. That question changes everything. And if enough people begin to live from that depth, then the consequences are not merely personal, they are collective. Because a person in contact with soul does not build life the same way as a person who is severed from it. Relationships change, parenting changes, teaching changes, leadership will change, community and work changes, healing changes. The metrics of success will change. The quality of attention changes. The need to dominate reduces. The compulsion to perform weakens. The willingness to betray oneself for belonging begins to fall away. And old systems do not even need to be fought theatrically in order to lose power. They simply begin to lose relevance when fewer people are willing to feed them with unconsciousness. This is why remembrance is not just personal comfort, it's collective medicine. When one person truly sees and releases a deep pattern, the movement does not stop at the skin. It changes family lines. It changes future relationships. It changes what will be transmitted to children. It changes the field around that person. It changes everything. A single human being who refuses unconscious repetition becomes a pivot point between what has been and what now may become possible. That is sacred work. Often quiet work, but sacred nonetheless. And perhaps that is why you are drawn to this at all. Not because you need another doctrine, not because you need more metaphysical decoration, not because you want to escape life into an abstract spirituality, but because something in you is tired of surface explanations. Something in you knows that life is not merely happening to you. Something in you knows there is an order even in mystery, meaning even in pain, intelligence in what first appears chaotic. And perhaps something in you is now ready not merely to think about this, but to live from it. To stop treating the deeper dimensions of being as occasional curiosities. To stop asking permission to trust what your own deeper knowing has been trying to show you for years. To stop reducing yourself to the smallest stories others can tolerate, because you are not merely a personality moving through random time. You are a living expression of a deeper continuity. You are the universe, the now, the is. The deep and living articulation. You are the is. The is ever present. It is the field of life, intelligence and pattern and wisdom. It is not locked in the past. It is not a museum of your previous selves. It is not merely memory as archive. It is awareness, alignment, memory, projection as a living presence now. Wisdom as an omnipresence. Intelligence as a field. The is what remains when the noise drops. It is what quietly persists beneath the changing weather of thought, culture, fear, ambition, and identity. It is the deeper order in which your wounds and your gifts and your history and your possibilities and your body and your soul, your humanity and your mastery over yourself are never finally separate. When you begin to live from there, even a little, your life changes. You speak differently. You choose differently. You suffer differently. You will love differently. You will stop chasing empty forms of success. You will become less interested in appearing whole and more devoted to becoming real. The question is no longer whether some mystical record exists somewhere beyond the veil, because the real question is whether you can become still enough, honest enough, and embodied enough that the deeper truth of your being is no longer drowned out by that noise. Can you listen without forcing? Can you ask without performance? Can you feel without fleeing? Can you receive without inflation? Can you let what is true begin to reorganize the way you live? Because if you can, then life stops feeling accidental. It begins to feel participatory. Not easier necessarily, but truer. And perhaps that is the greatest remembrance. You are never separate from the field. You are only taught to look away, taught to distrust the subtle, taught to live from the outermost edge of yourself, taught to confuse the noise with reality and speed with meaning. But now you are looking, now you are listening, now perhaps you are ready, not simply to discuss the deeper order of life, but to stand inside it, to let it refine you, to let it strip away what is false, to let it restore what has been buried, to let it bring life into greater coherence. Not because you've discovered something foreign to you, but because you're finally consenting to what has always been quietly present, the is. Not distant, not abstract, not bound by time, living, omnipresent, here. And waiting, if waiting is even the right word, for your full participation. So no, your story is not finished. No, your patterns are not final. No, your wounds are not your identity. And no, your soul is not broken. There may be pain. There may be confusion. There may be long seasons of forgetting. But forgetting is not the end of knowing. It is only distance from contact. And contact can return. Quietly, honestly, and now. So perhaps the invitation is simpler than the mind expects, and more demanding than the ego would prefer. But be still enough to hear. Be sincere enough to ask. Be brave enough to feel. Be humble enough to receive. Be steady enough to live what you're shown, because when you do, remembrance stops being an idea. It becomes a way of walking, listening, seeing, a way of inhabiting your own life. And then, little by little, you stop trying to become someone else's version of an awakened person. You stop performing spirituality. You stop collecting symbols while avoiding substance. You stop looking for authority outside the field of truth already moving within you. You begin, at last, to live the depth of what was always there. Not perfectly, not all at once, but truly. And maybe that is what this was always trying to point you towards. Not a fascination with a mystical concept, not an attachment to a label, but direct relationship with the living field of intelligence that has never ceased to hold you, the is, the unbroken field of life. The wisdom that does not belong to time, though it contains the idea and moves through time. The memory that is not trapped in the past because it's alive now. It is the subtle ground in which you are becoming your body, your soul, and the greater whole that are never finally divided. When you begin to live from there, your life does not become unreal. It becomes more real, more exact, more intimate, more participatory, more aligned with what is true and less organized around what is merely loud. And in that shift, something extraordinary happens. You stop asking the world to tell you who you are. You stop looking to wounded systems to author your meaning. You stop waiting for certainty before you begin living honestly. You begin to trust the deeper movement. You begin to recognize the old patterns without worshipping them. You begin to meet your wounds without becoming them. You begin to sense that even your suffering, when honestly met, can become part of your refinement. And slowly, life ceases to feel like something happening at random. It begins to feel like a conversation, a living conversation between your choices and your becoming, between what you inherited and what you are now free to transform, between your fear and your courage, between your past momentum and your present participation, between the story you were given and the deeper truth that has always been trying to emerge through you. And perhaps that is the true gift of what has historically been called the Akashic Records. Not that they will tell you everything in some spectacular burst of revelation, but that they will remind you that your life belongs to a field of meaning deeper than confusion, deeper than conditioning, deeper than the narrow identities of the age. They remind you that the soul is not an abstraction, the consciousness is not trivial, the memory is not only mental, the wisdom is not manufactured, and the reality is more intimate, more alive, and more participatory than you have been taught. And that you, exactly as you are already inside it, already held by it, already speaking with it, whether you know it or not. You are it. You are the is. The only real question is whether you are willing to listen, whether you are willing to become quiet enough, whether you are willing to let go of the self you perform long enough to meet the self that is real, whether you are willing to stop searching for some distant temple and recognize that the doorway has always been closer than breath, because the is not elsewhere. It is woven through this moment, through your body and life, through the stillness beneath your thought, through the strange precision of what keeps returning until it's met, through the gifts that keep calling, through the grief that keeps asking to be honored, the love that keeps asking to be trusted, the truth that keeps waiting for your consent. And when you give that consent, something changes. Not theatrically, not all at once, but irrevocably. You begin to traverse differently. You begin to speak from a deeper place. You begin to choose what is true over what is merely convenient. You begin to understand that sovereignty is not rebellion for its own sake. It is aligned with what your soul can no longer deny. You begin to see that freedom is not the absence of form, but the ability to participate consciously in your own becoming. And from there, your life is no longer just a sequence of events. It becomes practice, prayer, inquiry. It becomes relationship with the living field itself. The is, always here, always present, always more subtle than the noise, more faithful than fear. And the knowing that all of this, in the end, is simply an invitation home. Not as a retreat, not as an escape, but home as a return to contact, a return to coherence, a return to the deeper order of your own being. Return to the timeless intelligence that never stopped holding you even when you forgot. Because that is the deepest truth. You may forget, the world may distract you, pain may harden you, noise may bury you, but the is does not leave. It remains quietly, patiently, unforceful, not withdrawing, just simply present. And when at last you turn towards it, you realize something both humbling and liberating. You were never searching for something outside yourself. You are remembering how to stand inside what has always been, the is, the living field, the omnipresent intelligence, the wisdom beneath time, the silent continuity of being. And from there, the next chapter of your life is not something handed to you, it's something you participate in consciously. not from fear, not from intimidation, not from forgetting, from sovereignty, from honesty, from truth, from living in the presence of what I like to call the is.